What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone in the world.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. College can be a great place to build community, friendships, and lifelong connections. But for some students, it can be a really lonely place. In 2023, a Gallup poll found that 39% of students reported feeling loneliness, and that's got university administrations concerned. Loneliness can bring long-term health consequences. U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy equated the mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. That's according to a Surgeon General report published in 2023. Today, we take a look at loneliness on college campuses and hear how some are working to address it. But first, we want to hear from students. Joining us now are two students studying at the University of Connecticut. I connected with both of them on a panel about student loneliness this fall. Krista Mitchell is a senior at the University of Connecticut, and she joins us this morning. Krista, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, good morning. It's great to be here. A great honor. Thank you so much.
Well, it's our honor that you are here with us today. And also joining us is Bonnibel Lilith Rampertab, who is a sophomore at UConn. Bonnibel, thank you so much for being here too.
Thank you for having me.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or if you would like to share your own college experience, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Krista, today we're talking about loneliness, and we started the show by talking about how there are 39% of students who experience loneliness. Is that something that you can relate to?
I would definitely say so. I mean, for me, my experience of loneliness was more so during my middle school and high school years, but I definitely did experience that during my first year of college. Because I grew up in such a small town, I definitely grew up feeling somewhat isolated from my peers because of the limited social interaction. And it definitely felt like I was somewhat living in a bubble, well, both literally and metaphorically, because my town was so geographically isolated, but also because the number of people that I was regularly interacting with was so limited. And by limited, I mean extremely limited. There was only like 90 kids in my grade. And so when I came to UConn, I was just completely overwhelmed because growing up in such a small town, I had built so much of my identity around how I felt other people perceived me and some of those negative experiences I had during middle school and high school. And when I came to UConn, everything was just, it was so freeing. Like nobody had any preconceived notion of who I was. So it felt like I had to totally reinvent myself because it was both freeing and frightening at the same time. So my first year of college, I felt like I was just kind of just drifting. I didn't really have anywhere to ground me. I didn't really have any close friends. And it was a very lonely time until I joined the art department at UConn, which became my greatest passion. And I met so many people, and that was something that really grounded me.
Well, we certainly want to talk more about your art as we have this conversation, and also want to get into a little bit because of your upbringing up until the point of going to college is such a different space, and then going to college is like a whole different world. How do you think that sort of pre-college, that sort of more negative experience or more negative self-talk, how did that impact how you saw yourself and also your ability to start building new connection in a new place?
I think I was very limited with the number of people that I was interacting with. And even though I have a couple of close friends from my town that I'm still friends with to this day, I just kind of got used to this feeling of not really belonging and feeling like an outsider within my own community. just for having a lot of different interests than a lot of my peers. And again, no hard feelings towards the people in my town. It's just kind of the way it is. But it definitely impacted my confidence in social situations and my self-esteem to a degree. So when I started attending UConn, I was very awkward in a lot of social interactions at first. I wasn't really sure exactly how to present myself because, like I said, previously, I had built so much of my identity around what I thought other people thought of me or like what I thought they expected me to be. And so at UConn, nobody had any like preconceived idea of who I was supposed to be. So I had a really tough time figuring out exactly who I was going to present myself as and like who I actually was. Because it was wonderful having like the freedom to fully be myself. But honestly, the big question was, who am I? And that took a while to figure out.
Well, absolutely. When you said awkward, I was thinking of myself as a college student. That first year is like, wow, I did not know what was going on, what was happening, who I was going to meet. But I agree with you too. Like there is a sense of excitement, but also a little trepidation of what a big change. And so, Bonnibel, with what Krista just shared, did anything resonate with you? Any similar experiences, or what was your experience like?
Um, I can definitely relate to like finding solace in art. Like my art form is writing. I like for like my high school project, my high school like capstone was on depression, and like that ties into loneliness as well. And like if it weren't like if it weren't for my loneliness, I wouldn't be such like I wouldn't be as good of a writer as I am because writing gives me solace. Writing gives me like a sense of purpose and stuff. Um, yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's very much a close connection for you in terms of your experiences of feeling loneliness and creating art. How do you also connect loneliness with mental health?
Um, I feel like they go hand in hand. Like I think more about my depression than my loneliness, but like they do like they're intertwined, and like being lonely can exacerbate my depression and um yeah.
And has it been challenging trying to break out of that cycle, especially I think sometimes we become lonelier because we start to self isolate because you don't want to have those interactions with the outside world, and because that can be very difficult to navigate. Are you able to sort of break out of that cycle or find some balance there throughout the years?
Well, I try to put myself out there. I try to be like my authentic self, and although that may filter some people out, like the people that do stay, like I value them and I care about them, and like they value me for me. So
Well, I also think finding your authentic self is such a big thing. It's a big question, and I feel like that's something that we are all still on this journey together in some ways. And Krista, what helped you start to break out of that cycle of your own sort of discomfort zone and start building the confidence and connections?
For me, it was very similar to what it was for Bonnibel. For me, it was art. Well, actually, my original passion was in writing, and then I shifted over to art during my freshman year because I realized that I was spending all of my free time drawing. And so during my spring semester of my freshman year, I took my first drawing class at UConn, and it just filled me with an incredible sense of like purpose and stability. And I just felt myself like wanting to throw all of my passion into visual art. And growing up in my town, I had spent a lot of time doing art. It was always something I enjoyed. It was a way for me to channel a lot of my feelings, including feelings of loneliness and isolation. But I had always considered it more of a hobby, and that writing was going to be my primary career path. But taking that first art class was like so eye opening to me that this is truly what I want to do. Not to mention that the professor was extremely welcoming and kind, and she made me feel very supported when I was just so isolated at UConn. And then my second year at UConn, I became an art major in addition to being an English major. And being in that community of art students really gave me the stability I needed to succeed at UConn because I was used to a small school environment, and the art department at UConn is very small. So I was seeing the same people every day, interacting with familiar faces, small classes. I felt like the professors really knew me. And so from there, I started to feel a lot more safe at UConn, just happier. Not to mention, I was so incredibly passionate about my coursework. So art has been a way for me not only to channel my emotions, but to find a sense of community.
So I want to ask this next question to both of you, but we'll go with Christopher since you were just talking about your art and this is kind of art specific. But what was it about drawing and visual arts that drew you in and you realized that that was not only a way for you to express your feelings and to find joy, but at the end of the day, you end up with a piece of art, like a literal art in front of you?
I feel like art is something that's very meditative for me. It's something that when I was growing up in my town, especially during COVID, when I was at home a lot, it was something that I could do to pass the time, something to throw my passion into. And it was just very satisfying to know that at the end I was going to have a piece of art that really reflected who I was inside, that expressed how I was feeling, that it was something that other people might be able to relate to, that I could share with the rest of the world. Um, and not to mention just the process itself, I feel is very satisfying. It's just something that I feel I'm drawn to just innately, something that I just enjoy spending all of my time doing. So it's very comforting. But being in the art department is nice because I'm also around other people with that interest. It's not often that you come across people who have that exact interest, especially in like visual art. And so I'm talking with other people who really understand this, who understand that like feeling of just extreme passion and desire to sit there and just create all day. And that's been really liberating and uplifting for me.
And has that opened you up as well, wanting
Oh
to
yes,
do more?
definitely. The more experience I had just being around other people, the more confident I became in social situations. I got over a lot of this fear of being judged, and I just started to be more of myself.
Well, I think that's a great point because oftentimes I think in theory, we know that it's good for us to go out there and put yourself out there, whether or not it's hanging out with somebody or creating a piece of art. But I think we also understand that that's a very vulnerable position to be in, and you have to meet the right people at the right time. And so I'm really glad to hear that that was your experience for you, at least, that you were able to find sort of your like-minded friends and create connection. And so, Bonnibel, I would love for you to share your experience as well in terms of writing. What is it about writing that you feel like you can connect with and express yourself? And are you able to find community through writing?
Well, writing it's a very like raw form of like expression for me, and like I also like listening to music a lot. So like I could listen to music and write at the same time, so it's a win-win for me. Um, and to answer the other question, I do find like a community of writers like online and in person. Like for example, I took a performance poetry class and I met some people, pretty cool people. Um, Online, I met some cool people that are also into writing. Like art is a very social. Art is meant to be shared.
Mm.
Art is a so well, I mean, you don't have to share it, but like it's very easy to share it, and it helps like bring conversation and bring like community.
Well, I love the idea of art is meant to be shared, and you don't have to, but you are sharing your art. And can you talk about some of the connections that you've made through art? Are you able to find like-minded, really good friends, or even just to have a conversation that you never thought you would have?
Yeah. For example, at that panel at UConn, like there was other creative writer there, and I was really happy to know that there's other creative writers out there who are interested and who are like attuned to mental health and stuff. So I I gave that person my contact information and so that we could talk about writing and stuff. I just thought that was really cool that like there's other writers out there who want to like communicate with other writers.
And what has that experience been like? Have you been connecting with the person, or did that open up more desires to want to connect with people?
It definitely opened up more desires to connect with people because like I feel like some people find like being into art like weird, but at the same time like I think it's cool. Like I don't think it's weird. I think it's cool that like there's different forms of art that people are interested in and they express themselves through those ways. And I definitely want to meet more writers. Like I want to know what their writing styles are like, and and yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of artists and writers out there who would be happy to connect and probably feel very similar. And I think a lot of the things that both of you are sharing with us today resonates with many. And Krista, you're a senior now. What would you tell an underclassman who might be struggling with loneliness? If another younger person came to you, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to think of one thing that they're very passionate about. It doesn't have to be art. It could be math. It could be humanities, psychology, whatever that they feel just interested in. It doesn't necessarily have to be their major. Maybe it's something that they've always been passionate about for years as a hobby. And to go and see if they can find a group on campus that does that activity. There's a website at UConn called UContact that lists all the different clubs that are available. And I would just suggest getting involved because you can meet a lot of amazing people that way. My sophomore year, I joined the Daily Campus and I started working for them as a contributing artist. And then a year later, I became a staff artist for them. And that was something that was really grounding for me. And as I was dealing with a lot of these emotions and finding my place at UConn, creating illustrations for the Daily Campus was something that I could always fall back on, something that I knew I was going to do, something that was very comforting, very routine for me. Not to mention, I met a lot of amazing people that way. And also, like I mentioned, being in the art department really grounded me, finding like-minded people. So finding some sort of activity that you're passionate about, whether it's within or outside your major, I think can be very helpful to meet people that share your similar interests.
So it sounds like no step is too small, right?
No, just taking a small step because it can feel so overwhelming at UConn because there's just thousands and thousands of people. I remember my first year just being like, wow, I am just so alone, surrounded by like seas and seas of just people that I have no idea who they are. And all my lecture classes are so big. And it does improve over time once you get into smaller classes where you really know your classmates. But that first year can be really tough. So just taking a small step to join an activity or a small group of people on campus can be amazing to meet a couple of friends to get your foot in the water.
Well, just by you describing that, I'm suddenly remembering my first day, and I agree that there's so many people. My first class was a one-on-one class, and there's like 300 people sitting in the same classroom. That can be very overwhelming. And Bonnibel, kind of want to ask a similar question with you too, in terms of, if a young person comes to you who may be interested in writing, wanting to try to express themselves, or really are looking for connection too, what would you tell them?
Well, specifically for writing, like one of the first events I ever went to was this poetry reading at the Women's Center by Chrysanthemum, and Chrysanthemum told me that like be inspired by anything and write about it. Like that's like how we write about like what's ever on our mind, whatever is on our mind, and like anything can come out of it. Yeah, like I think that just writing every day, making it a routine, like practicing it every day is very important. It's any art form, not just writing. Like
Right.
if you do it daily and you enjoy it, then that's awesome.
And do you think doing that kind of art practice helps you build confidence in wanting to reach out to connect with people?
Yeah. I think that like art pieces that you make or art pieces that you enjoy can be like a great conversation starter for people who are also interested in the art. Like like I make it a point to like listen to not just listen to albums, but engage in art and to like talk about it with other people. Like I the arts is always a part of me, and I'm very grateful for the arts.
Well, we appreciate you being here with us to tell us about your ideas of art and how we can also feel comfortable enough to engage in both art, all kinds of art forms from your perspective. You've been listening to Bonnibel Lilith Rampertab, who's a student at UConn. Thank you so much, Bonnibel, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And you were also listening to Krista Mitchell. Krista, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
And coming up, we learn about how college administrators are addressing loneliness and helping students break out of isolation. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. For many students, college can be a start of a new and exciting chapter, but that change is not always easy. Sometimes it can be more challenging than not, leading some students to self-isolate. There isn't one answer to why student loneliness is on the rise. Our next guests say that it started long before the COVID-19 pandemic. But many college administrators are working to address it. Joining us now to tell us more is Dr. Nick Pinkerton. He's an Associate Dean of Counseling Services and Wellbeing at Southern Connecticut State University. Nick, welcome to the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Alex Kafka. He's a senior editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Alex, thank you for being with us as well.
Thanks so much for having me, Catherine.
And so I just want to start with Nick here. You've been listening to the conversation earlier with our lovely students from the University of Connecticut. Anything that jumped out to you that you would like to respond to?
There were so many things. Yeah, I really appreciated their comments and their stories. A few things that stand out to me is just the overwhelm that one can feel as they enter into this brand new environment. I think part of what I heard in some of the story there was this concern around negative self-talk, this perception of, am I good enough? Am I going to be likable? Am I going to be successful? This imposter syndrome that can be such a part of what sort of hobbles our experience and our self-perception as we're entering into this brand new space, and how hard it can be to sort of reinvent yourself in this brand new area. And also, I think the other piece that I would pull away is just how many opportunities there are to engage, to get involved, to follow your passions. We heard a lot about the passions and the art and how powerful that was. And I think that's really the recipe for most students is what can you find that you really enjoy, and can you find others that have that shared interest so that you can begin cultivating those relationships that might eventually become those really close, meaningful connections that are going to carry you through.
Well, and I think it's interesting, too, because it sounds like those concerns or challenges can really be across generations. And is this reflective of what you're seeing working in a college mental health center? What are you seeing and hearing from students right now?
Yeah, it absolutely is reflective. You mentioned sort of COVID and, of course, the impact there, but also I think you mentioned that these are trends that have been here prior to the pandemic, and I think that's important to note as well. I've been very interested in this topic as a clinician, as someone who cares about students and their experience, and I've been paying attention to some of the research that came out, for example, by Jean Twenge, by Jonathan Haidt, and the new book that I think he just put out on the anxious generation, rewiring childhood. And to me, I think there's many factors we can talk about here, but I can't help but continue to push into this issue of our changing ecosystem of technology and how that really has fundamentally shifted the way in which we connect with one another. I think about how much time young people are spending on screens and how that might interfere with their ability to connect with one another in person and develop the confidence and the competence that you need to be able to feel comfortable doing that. And I think, unfortunately, that is a lot of what I'm seeing. I think the distress sometimes that college students experience gets talked about as depression and anxiety. That's what they're coming in with. But right underneath that is this deep well of loneliness. The quality of their relationships is not what they're wanting. The social support that they're feeling isn't what they're needing. And I think that's maybe if it were up to me, that would be the number one thing that we actually focus on as a preventative measure to support student success and connection and mental health and well-being overall.
And Alex, you're the author of the new report, Overcoming Student Loneliness, and it was published by the Chronicle of Higher Education in May. Can you talk about how did that get started, and what were you hearing from students and college administrators that made you want to explore this topic?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks again for having me on. So the origins of that report were we had been covering student mental health and wellness generally very closely for many years, prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and loneliness was certainly a theme that was coming up more and more, especially during that harrowing 2020-21 lockdown period. And so I had done a report on student resilience during the pandemic, and one of the things that a lot of clinicians were talking about then was the possibility of a so-called echo pandemic, which would be sort of a societal post-traumatic delayed response to it. And then after, the lockdown period, people were so eager to move on that I didn't hear that much more about that, but I was curious as I was still seeing and reading about increased anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, et cetera, for instance, in the Healthy Mind Study, which is a big prominent survey, um, including social anxiety and loneliness, whether we were in fact seeing an echo pandemic. And many of the people I spoke to said, yeah, quite possibly we are. I don't know if Nick has a point of view on that. And so even as we were talking about that, then the Surgeon General was launching his bully pulpit tour, including college campuses. And I think it was super timely and super important. And then by the time that was underway, I wanted to go deeper and look more closely at the origins of, the history of, and then more importantly, for college administrators, what they could do about it. And so that's a big part of the report is, it's quite solutions oriented.
Well, and Nick, I would love for you to respond to that too, because the impact of the pandemic, I think in some ways it's really hard to quantify and really sort of have, some hardcore data to sort of pick apart. But I think, we all know, or maybe yourself, you have experienced that kind of isolation. And of course, it's I think it's really human that you want to move on. But then like Alex was saying, then we have this echo sort of pandemic. Is that something that you're seeing, Nick?
Yeah, I completely understand that sentiment. I think that it's not uncommon after a major incident for the true ramifications to only hit quite a while afterwards, where you've had time to maybe process and understand and recognize the continued implications that it's having on your life. I think as a society, not just as for our students in college, that the grief process of what that meant of being at home, being sort of cut off and disconnected in so many ways is certainly huge. But I would say that particularly for our younger generations, it's been really interesting to sort of observe the different cohorts of students and how they've responded to this. In some ways, they hit this period in their life at different developmental stages. So you're sort of seeing students that are coming in now in college who, they were affected by this at earlier points in their development. And so every cohort has kind of had their own unique struggle in some ways with this, and it's affected some more than others. Again, I guess I would just emphasize that I think while that certainly the pandemic was an accelerant of a lot of the trends, I think these were emerging before, and I think unfortunately they continue. And I think this issue of social disconnection and of loneliness is a major issue that we're continuing to see, and I unfortunately I do fear that it may continue.
Well, and Alex, with what Nick just mentioned too, how we've been talking about this is something that is not new. It was pre-pandemic, but certainly the acceleration that we saw during the pandemic is very real. Can you talk about the impacts of that experience that really changed the way they are able to socialize and learn those very important social skills and to build friendship? And because they didn't really get a chance to do that, that it is impacting their future now.
Yeah, well, Nick, I think has it just right. I mean, if you look at the literature, these trends can go back, depending which surveys you look at, to the 1970s. Trends up in a lot of these psychological issues. So there one element of socialization is just practice makes perfect. And I was really fascinated listening to Krista and Bonnibel because they are really inspiring examples of so many things that the experts talk about. For example, when Bonnibel said art's meant to be shared, my mind flashed to one of the books I read when I was doing the research for my report. Jeremy Nobel has a book called Project Unlonely, and it includes a description of colors and connection, which is sort of a creative way of getting groups together to talk and to draw and to bond and exactly share their art. And there are so many examples of whether it's, creativity in an artistic sense or creativity in an academic sense or some kind of community service project. Creativity can mean a lot of different things, but bottom line is that's how you find your people, whether it's, athletics or a club or a symphony or band group or whatever. And colleges, the good news is they're in a great place to help students learn these skills, to get the earbuds out of their ears, get their eyes off their screens, get them out interacting with each other in 3 dimensions in real time. And uh, experts really stress that it's hard to make that initial leap. Socialization is not easy, and the way you learn it is because you figure out it's super rewarding. In fact, you can't live without it. But that doesn't make it any easier to take those first few steps.
Well, and with what you just mentioned too, and certainly something that we talked about with the students earlier too, is there really is no step that's too small, but it is very hard to even make that small step to begin with for many people. And I think that's the advice that I think we collectively hear a lot is, oh, just get involved, find something that you're really into. But what if there's something you're not into, that you don't really have a hobby, or maybe you want to start one, but you really don't know where to begin. And so breaking out of that bubble of isolation, both sort of physically, mentally, and I guess artistically or in a hobby sense, it's very difficult. Can you respond to that? Is that something that you are hearing from students or have heard from students?
Oh, absolutely. I hear it from students and I hear it from administrators who point out that no matter how many great programs they put out there, that the urge for connection really has to come from the students themselves. Another thing that comes to mind is a book by Cassie Killam called The Art and Science of Connection. And she describes several different kinds of social connection: butterflies, wallflowers, and fireflies. And butterflies thrive on frequent interaction, casual connection; wallflowers on infrequent interaction and casual connection; fireflies on infrequent interaction and deep connection; and then evergreens on frequent interaction and deep connection. And I found that really interesting because the colleges I see um, doing the most effective social connection programs for their students have a range, a variety of activities, so that, students who don't even feel particularly comfortable talking to other students have a place to begin. They can, just kind of be the wallflower on the side of the room and just get used to being around people again and gradually dip their toe in the water and take steps. And then if you think about your own college experiences, certainly with mine, different periods of college, I was probably a wallflower at one point, an evergreen at another, a firefly at a third. So it really helps to have kind of different possibilities on campus or online to kind of experiment with who you are, get comfortable in your own skin, and how you like to relate to other people.
And Nick, I want to follow up with you here, building on what Alex just shared, especially with how difficult it could be for some students to make that first leap. And can you also talk about, are there factors that make some students more vulnerable to loneliness than others?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build off of that, yeah, I think of those as a very interesting sort of a way to conceptualize some of the different types of relationships and that we might have. I also think there's an evolution of them, right? So that maybe the beginning part of a relationship is going to be a little more superficial, and it's going to be sort of small talk, and then it's going to evolve into maybe having some additional encounters and some increased vulnerability and sharing, and maybe at some point you find yourself, and you're not, and I have discussions with students about this, you find yourself in a relationship with someone who you just consider your absolute best friend, and you're not sure how you even got there, and trying to go back and sort of dissect that and think, oh, you know what? It started with just showing up and just stepping outside of my comfort zone, embracing the awkward, and sort of saying hello, and then saying hello again. And it's those pieces that I think can help evolve a relationship into what I think we hope that students maybe have a few of those evergreen relationships across their lifespan. That's, I think, what we all are sort of hoping for. The piece of this that also stands out to me is, we're seeing in terms of trends related to mental health, a lot of anxiety. Certainly, anxiety and depression have been the number one presenting complaints for students related to mental health. And my view of the most recent Healthy Minds survey actually showed that the increasing, most rapid trending concerns were actually related to social anxiety and also relationship difficulties. And that makes perfect sense. There's such a social component to so much of this, right? And anxiety often manifests itself as avoidance, as problematic avoidance. It makes perfect sense. If there's something that is really worrying me and stressing me out, I'm probably going to work hard to avoid it. And yet, when you are socially anxious and your coping strategy is to avoid social encounters, you don't get the opportunity to challenge that perspective, to have a restorative experience that reminds you, oh, you know what? I am likable. I am worthy. I can do this. And so much of the challenge, I think, is helping students be courageous in their willingness to sort of step out of that comfort zone and step into experiences with one another. But it is really hard. It's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to expect. And I'll just point out one other piece. I think we're also competing, I think, with an increasingly powerful entertainment economy, attention economy, in that for many students, I think they describe to me that their phone is really their sort of their coping, their strategy of when they're feeling that sense of disconnection, or we think about solitude, the voluntary embracing of a moment of self-reflection, and I think students are struggling with that, and so they're looking to their device for that sort of distraction, that quick dopamine hit. And unfortunately, I think it is pulling them out of opportunities for experience, for those little hellos and those beginnings of something that could evolve.
Well, and really quickly before we go to break here, Nick, because you mentioned sort of that digital component of this, we always talk about how the in-person connection is usually better versus over a screen. But I also know there are students who have found really profound relationships, friendships through social media. Is there anything positive that they can get out from maybe spending
Yeah.
not too long on the social media
Sure.
platforms? But yeah, what are your thoughts
No,
about
and
that?
I'm glad you mentioned this because I don't want to come off as too one-sided about this. I do think, and to your other point about sort of maybe folks that are most vulnerable, I think if you are feeling othered, if you are feeling marginalized, for whatever the reason, if it's based on identity or your perspective or your experience or interest, the wonderful thing about online is that you can find people who have that shared interest. You can find folks that you can connect with, and sometimes on a really deep and meaningful level. So it's such a powerful technology. I do think that it can be very positive in a variety of ways. I also think there's a lot of differences that you can kind of look at in the ways in which we connect. For example, is it synchronous? Is it, are you in sync with the other person as you're connecting with them? Is it asynchronous? Is it facilitating negative social comparison? And, and a variety of other challenges we could sort of identify. So it is a wonderful thing. I think like anything, it's about your sort of digital diet and it's about the health of the relationship you create with it.
Well, thank you so much for those thoughts. You've been listening to Dr. Nick Pinkelton. He's a psychologist and the director of counseling services at Southern Connecticut State University. And you were also listening to Alex Kafka, who's a senior editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and they'll both be staying with us. And listeners, we would love to hear from you. We know it's hard to talk about loneliness, but maybe if we start fighting the stigma around loneliness, then we can start finding solutions. Let us know if you have any thoughts, 888-720-9677, or give us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're talking about loneliness on college campuses. Loneliness can lead to even more self-isolation, and it's hard to break out of that cycle, especially for students and young adults. Still with us to talk about solutions is Dr. Nick Pinkerton. He's an Associate Dean of Counseling Services and Wellbeing at Southern Connecticut State University, and Alex Kafka, who is a Senior Editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education. So, Alex, can you talk about the connection between how loneliness might impact academics?
Sure. So colleges are concerned about loneliness in and of itself, but of course they're also concerned about student success and how loneliness and other wellness challenges affect that. And if you look at surveys, they show that a lot of the students who stop or drop out do so, at least in large part, because of emotional issues. Often there are also money issues or other things going on, but mental health plays a big part in that. So as colleges see more students, especially post-pandemic, disengaged academically, they can sort of correlate that to social disengagement and isolation, and the two are connected.
Well, and with that in mind too, especially going to college, it's so overwhelming in all sense of the experience, let alone when you're suffering from social isolation. Is there anything that professors can do to support their students? Alex, based on your reporting, are you seeing any of that?
Yes, there sure are a number of things, but I'd say the most important ones are just to be observant enough that if you see a student struggling, you can get them the help they need. And, Nick can probably tell you more because he's on the front lines of this, probably training and talking to faculty on his campus. But there are a number of programs like mental health first aid, red folder projects, things like that key faculty into first some of the signs of loneliness or depression and anxiety among their students, and then grounding them in the resources so that they can direct students to the help they need in a really efficient and tactful way.
And Nick, I wanted to ask you the same question too. Is there anything specific that professors should be doing or to look out for in order to support their students?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Alex is doing a great job of speaking to some of those efforts. The way I sometimes conceptualize these is first and foremost, how do you recognize and respond effectively to someone that's in crisis? It's sort of that crisis management piece. Can you pick up when a student is really not doing well? Do you know how to engage with them and talk with them in a way that's human and approachable and likely to get a response? And then where to send them in terms of the appropriate resources and referrals on campus. And there's so much that's happening in that arena, whether it's the weekly meetings that I have with various important folks on the campus talking about our students who are in distress and making sure they're connected to the right supports. But outside of the crisis management aspect, I hope and I think we're working very hard on really trying to think more broadly around how do you cultivate a community of care, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. And this does go to pedagogy, right? How the classroom is actually delivered and taught. Is there time for checking in and having group work and building it? Really, it's all about relationships, right? So does the professor feel that they can have a relationship with the students? Do they understand the availability of office hours and other supports? It's not always a clinician. In fact, it's often not a clinician who's in the counseling center providing treatment to students who's going to be the first one to see a student that's maybe disconnected or struggling. It's really the entire community. So we are really trying to think around how can we empower our full community to be able to be as supportive and engaging and to cultivate the connections and the care that's going to make everyone well.
We've got about a minute here left, but I would love to ask Alex for some final thoughts. What do you want our listeners to take away from this conversation today?
I'd like them to take away the fact that while there's obviously a big alarming problem here, colleges are really a great place to experiment with and offer robust solutions. When you think about it with people, once they go into their work lives these days, they might switch jobs every couple years or something. So college assumes an even greater importance than it's had traditionally in helping students learn not just academic skills, but social skills and come up with that solid, stable sense of identity. But the good news is colleges, by and large, are really taking the effort seriously and trying some great innovative stuff.
And we've got about 30 seconds here. I also want Nick to get some final thoughts in. What do you hope our listeners take away from this conversation today?
Yeah, I would just really echo what Alex just mentioned. I think college is an amazing place where I think the reason we have such high standards and expectations is because we know what that experience is like. It often gets talked about as the most exciting and powerful and amazing time of your life, and for our students, it really is. And so I think we're continuing to look at addressing this. But college is amazing. I would say to our students, just feel free to step out of your comfort zone. Know you're not alone. We are always here to support you. And you've got everything it takes inside of you to make it work. So go get it.
Go get it is a great advice for everyone today to hear, I think. Thank you so very much for that. You've been listening to Dr. Nick Pinkerton from Southern Connecticut State University and Alex Kafka from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank
you so much.
Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible and our amazing intern Frankie DeVivo. Today is his last day with us. We're so very sad, but we're so very lucky to get to work with him. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.